every peace negotiation happens in Rangoon and in Naypyidaw, but on the other hand, there is a war.
For the last 10 years or so, the mainstream media and politicians have been pumping out the propaganda about the myth of Burma's transition to democracy. Aung San Suu Kyi was widely hailed as a savior and an international icon for promoting peace, democracy, and human rights. In 2016, the two Nobel Peace Prize winners even discussed opening up Burma for tourism.
There's a very welcome tourist industry that is developing.
Yet, nothing was further from the truth, and we see the international icon defending genocide in the international courts of justice. All the while, some 1 million ethnic people languish in refugee and IDP camps. While there are justified reasons for engaging with Burma, it should be realized the process was never going to work as they planned. It was always going to be an immoral work in progress, in that the ethnic people were ignored and sacrificed. Basically, the international community decided to dance with the devil. So let's take a look at why the peace process collapsed in a genocidal mess, and why today, in Burma, peace means war. Let's first look at the geography of Burma, Myanmar. There are 7 named ethnic states, historically occupied by a dozen major groups of non-Burmese ethnic people. There is Arakan or Rakhine State, Chin State, Kachin State, Shan State, Karenni State, Karen State, and Mon State. Sagaing Division in the north also has a huge ethnic population of Naga peoples. Shan State itself is over 1/4 of the entire country, with the Shans being the majority, but there are many ethnic people here, such as the Kachin, Rawang, Lahu, Lisu, Aka, Palong, Wa, and Kokan peoples. These regions are basically ancestral lands belonging to the ethnic people, and in many cases, controlled by their own ethnic armies.
All this Kachin land.
Most of Burma is actually ethnic land, making up some 60 to 70% of the country. It should be recognized that Burmese people, historically, never lived in these ethnic regions. Now the demographics. For decades, the Burmese dictators have claimed the ethnic people only make up some 30% of the population. But recent indications suggest the ethnic population could be up to 70%. In 2014, the government started a census, but it deliberately excluded the Muslim population, and also couldn't include all the Kachin people because the government was waging warfare in Kachin State. In any case, Aung San Suu Kyi stated on Al Jazeera television that the Burmese were actually minorities.
You are ethnically a Burman,
Yes.
which comprise, what, 2/3 of the country? There are many...
No, we are actually the minority in the whole country, because the other ethnic nationalities make up about 60%.
The census figures were deliberately unclear, and the fear of being outnumbered by the growing ethnic population is probably what prompted the genocidal campaign against the Muslim population that reached a peak in 2017. This included the mass burning of villages, killing and raping thousands, which forced some 740,000 people to Bangladesh. Now, I'm not debating whether they're called Rohingyas or Bengalis or what religion they are. The point is that they are human beings, and that the Burmese military brutally attacked them, mercilessly killed thousands, even throwing their babies into fires. If there is one thing that all the ethnic people have in common in Burma, it's that the Burman rulers have historically persecuted them for decades. Whereas India had a caste system, Burma had a type of dominant race system, with the Burmans acting as the dominant rulers over the ethnic people. To better understand the history and origins of this, let's chat to David Thakkerbaugh, the former vice president of the Karen National Union.
The idea is to treat all the non-Burman ethnics as subjects, and try to eliminate them culturally, try to eliminate them even physically. And they want all the lands, the natural resources, above ground, underground. So they are more like a Nazi, expansionist, imperialist regime. It has followed the same agenda of turning the country into what they call the Fourth Burman Empire. That is the real agenda of the past military dictatorship up to the present dictatorship. On the surface it is civilian, but the civilians are former military generals. So this is still the dictatorship following the same policy of conquest, suppression, military conquest. This kind of regime could have existed, for example, in Europe maybe 500 years ago, Middle Ages, maybe the Dark Ages. But we are in 21st century.
The decades of ethnic cleansing, racism, and persecution against the ethnic people is now a long-standing part of Burma's history. And it continues today in 2020. One aspect of this is Burmanization, forced assimilation, the cultural and racial destruction of an ethnic people.
But right now, the ethnic people, their literatures and their culture has been banned, restricted for many years in our country. When I went to the primary school, they changed my name into Burmese name.
Our people in this country, especially non-Burmese people, have lost their indigenous rights.
In 2008, a new constitution was drafted, and Burma began its flirtation with Western democracy. The problem, however, was that this transition was basically a hoax, pure propaganda designed to keep the Burman military in power.
The fundamental problem is the constitution. It's a military drafted and adopted constitution to perpetuate the military control of state power. The military is still acting as a state within a state. Constitutionally, they have been given 25% in the parliament, 25% of the seats in the parliament, and for amendment of the constitution, the parliament has to get a vote of more than 75%. They still will hold the three important ministries, which are the Interior Ministry, the Defense Ministry, and Border Affairs Ministry.
Thus, the Constitution guarantees the military total control of the government, the armed forces, security forces, and veto power over any future changes. But of course, many insiders saw through this.
Today is November the 5th, 2010. We are very close to the election. We reject the election because we also believe that the election is a sham.
Opening up ties with the Burmese junta is the worst possible course of action. It's immoral. It's going to send the wrong message to the Burmese dictatorship. It's going to send the wrong message to the Burmese people. We're watching very carefully what we do in Burma will reflect not only our own country, but it will really reflect what this administration stands for us. And by sitting down at the table with them, we legitimize them. We are saying that they are a legitimate government to sit down with. They are not. We believe here, Mr. Secretary, that no government has rights unless they have the consent of the government. This is a group of gangsters that hold power through terror.
In 2019, the UN released a blockbuster of a report, a long-awaited indictment that identified the Burma military as being a large business enterprise comprised of two large companies, Myanmar Economic Holdings Limited and Myanmar Economic Corporation. The entire country is basically a business empire with its military as the profiteers and the soldiers as its enforcers. Basically, the Burman government is a military mafia willing to commit genocide against the ethnic people in order to retain its power and profits.
The businessmen in our country, who is the tops of the businessmen, who is the richest and who is the businessman, those people are members of the military and family, military family.
This is a group of gangsters that hold power through terror.
Engagement with the West was underway, and in 2016, the U.S. dropped economic sanctions against the regime. I want to point out, however, that all this was done while the Burman military was engaged in a military offensive against the Kachin people. It was an offensive that began in 2011 and continues until the present time in 2020. At the time they dropped the sanctions, there was over 100,000 internally displaced people in Kachin and Shan states.
The United States is now prepared to lift sanctions that we have imposed on Burma for quite some time. It is the right thing to do in order to ensure that the people of Burma see rewards from a new way of doing business and a new government.
They removed the economic sanctions against Burma, but at the same time, they still continuously fighting against the Kachin state. But especially they mostly focus killing the innocent people.
They dropped the sanction at the middle of the fight. In the meantime, our ethnic people are being killed, and the village set on fire, and the ethnic women were being raped. When they drop at the middle of all of these offensive, it is wrong. A lot of people suffer.
The offensive are going on in the Kachin state against the KIO, and in the Palau area, Palau region, against the Ta'an National Liberation Army, and against the Myanmar National Democratic Alliance Army in Kogan area. And there is also a new armed organization known as Arakan Army.
I think, if I'm not mistaken, there's a very welcome tourist industry that is developing.
Tourist industry, it was more of a genocide industry waged against the ethnic people. For example, here are the front lines in Kachin state.
Enemy, Burmese army. This is also Burmese army above the mountain, and this army. We defend this here.
The war started June 9, 2011.
This is the front line.
Burmese army. Burma army.
We are giving our lives. We are defending this land.
Why the Obama decides to remove the economic sanction? Because of they want a best face and they want a beautiful face on the wall. They would like to say, oh, our policies are very successful.
I would suggest, Mr. Secretary, that what gangster regimes like this understand is when we take tough stands against them, rather than trying to treat them courteously as if they are a democratic government. And while I wish President Obama success, these policies will not lead to the type of world that he was telling us about. There's a saying, you can't, and we can talk about Aung San Suu Kyi and our concern about these people all you want. There's a saying that says, you can't champion the oppressed unless you're willing to take on the oppressor. And if we sit down and legitimize the oppressors of this world, don't expect change.
Only 8 of the 21 ethnic armed organizations actually signed the original nationwide ceasefire in 2015. And some of these were just splinter groups. So it was never nationwide and never a ceasefire. It would soon become clear the whole thing was propaganda, with the regime seeking only to conduct more Burmanization and more militarization in ethnic regions.
The Burmese NCA is lousy. They're lying to the people, lying to the international community.
We see that the militarization has not changed because the military outposts still in our KNU area. So for me, I feel the NCA is failed.
Now we have already signed the NCA, nationwide ceasefire, but nothing really happened. In fact, they're not pulling out. The troops are staying in the current territories. They're not pulling out.
Since the ceasefire, the KNU signed the 2012 ceasefire with the Burmese government, we haven't seen tangible, results and changes into the ground. Although a lot of Western country, democratic country, they put human rights. They said they put human rights first, but we all know human rights never come first. So we feel very disappointed with the current leader as well, and we already have doubts that they might not represent our interests, and already now it seems like some of our doubts come true, and we are struggling.
Every peace negotiation happens in Rangoon and in Naypyidaw, but on the other hand, there is a war.
This is not nationwide ceasefire. Maybe ceasefire some part, not in current state, Kachin state or other state. You can see now the IDP is around here. This is not NCA. It is not NCA at all. I feel so broken heart when I see my people like this.
And the ceasefire is just a sham, just a show for the international community.
Although the politicians are giving peace rhetoric to the international community, but on the ground, the situation is not good at all. It is getting worse and worse day after day.
For instance, U.S. and Western government, they really care about the human rights. They are not going to cooperate with the government. Even they would like to cooperate with the Tamador, but they still need to consider the situations of our ethnic people.
So in summary, the ethnic nationalities of Burma are actually the majorities of the population, and they have a historical and moral birthright to control their own ancestral lands. The ethnic people should not have their rights simply handed over to the genocidal Burma regime. The only real solution is to rid the country of the Burman mafia, the military mafia, and allow the ethnic people to have self-determination. This is what the international community needs to understand.
If you really want to promote human rights, democracy values, and you really want to bring peace for Burma, please do not cooperate with the Tamador, who is committed a lot of international crimes in our country. And I also would like you to consider it before you make decisions, because your decisions and your actions could kill a lot of people in our country.
We know what's going on in Burma. That's a vicious gangster regime, one of the most despicable regimes in this planet, where they hold force by power, by brutalizing their own people. This is insanity. Instead of talking to the Burmese gangsters who run that country, we should be, just because they're in uniform, doesn't mean they're military people. These are gangsters. We should be asking the people in the military there, who are just citizens, to turn their guns on their oppressors and free their country from this despicable tyranny.
Some ethnic groups are still holding guns and still fighting, because those leaders are fighting for freedom and they protecting the ethnic people. Now those leaders are kinds of like, I would like to say, they are kinds of the hero for our ethnic. Therefore, please support to the ethnic armed group.
Winston Churchill once said, slavery is worse than war. I think we have a moral obligation to resist becoming a slave, to resist Burmanization, and reject phony peace deals like the NCA that only exploit the ethnic people. We also have the right to remove corrupt leaders who sell ethnic land, or allow divide and rule by the Burmans to continue against the ethnic people. One courageous example of ethnic leadership is the Northern Alliance.
I come here to write for a new history for Kachin people, Kachin states. Not only for Kachin, the country.
I would like to invite you to come to join the fight with us.
I'm Achin. I came along here to fight with my Kachin brothers because I want freedom. We Chins should be strong, and we have to fight against the Burmese dictatorship.
We want freedom.
That's what we can carry on. Our hearts are burning for freedom.
We have to work together, fight for the freedom.
In Burma, we live as slaves, so I come to join our army to fight for freedom.
We will free our people!
Our message to the ethnic people is to unite in common cause, join forces, trust your God, and write your own destiny. Here are some final words from some ethnic leaders.
Our ancestral land, and we must get this back into the hand of our people.
This is our land. I will fight for my freedom. I never give up. I was born here and I will die here.
We want to be recognized as a human being. And at the same time, we're not only fighting for a future, but we also think about our children, coming up generation. We want them to have good education. We want them to have good vision, good future for our children. So children are our future.
We want all ethnic people to have freedom.
Burma Army, go home!